3 years after Gloria had told Abby her twins belonged to another man, she was standing outside the daycare, with her hand already reaching toward Leo's sleeve. Abby saw it happen from across the parking lot. She had just stepped out of her car when she spotted Gloria crouching down beside her son, that familiar voice low and urgent, trying to pull the boy close. Leo looked up at the woman he had never seen before, confused and still holding the drawing he had made that morning. Abby crossed the parking lot in 15 seconds flat. "Take your hands off my son." Gloria straightened up. She opened her mouth to say something, but Abby had already stepped between her and the children, one arm around each of them, her body a wall. "You said they weren't Seth's," Abby said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "You said it out loud, in front of your whole family. You don't get to call them your grandchildren now." Gloria said nothing. Her jaw worked silently, her eyes going between Abby and the twins. Leo and Zoe pressed closer to their mother without understanding why. That was the moment Abby had been bracing for, in one way or another, since the night Seth had told her to leave his mother's house in the middle of January, with a bag of clothes and a baby shower gift she'd never had the chance to open. 3 years earlier, Abby had been exactly the kind of woman her mother always hoped she'd become. She had grown up in Sudbury with her mom Mona, just the two of them since Abby was 7 years old. Mona worked checkout at a grocery store for 22 years, never complained once, and somehow managed to keep their little house on Spruce Street warm and full of food, and never let Abby feel like she was missing anything she needed. What Abby was missing, she figured out later, was a father who had decided the responsibility wasn't for him before she was old enough to know what responsibility meant. She had grown up careful because of that. Careful about who she let in, careful about what she hoped for, careful about saying too much too soon. She met Seth at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. He was visiting his uncle in the cardiac ward, and he had stopped to ask her where the vending machines were, and somehow they had ended up talking for 40 minutes in the hallway while his uncle slept. When he asked for her number before leaving, she took 2 weeks to actually text him back. That caution felt like something she had earned. They dated quietly for almost 2 years. Seth was warm and funny, and he called Mona ma'am the first 3 times they met before she told him to stop. He worked in project management for a construction company and drove 40 minutes to Hamilton every weekend to see Abby, even in January, even when the 400 was a disaster. He was the kind of man who made Abby feel like she was worth the drive, every single time. The reason they kept things quiet was Gloria. Seth's mother lived in a wide brick house in Ancaster, the kind of neighborhood where every driveway had a second car and every front lawn had professional edging. Gloria had built that life with her late husband and run it alone since he died, and she had a very clear idea of what Seth's life was supposed to look like. Abby understood this before she ever met the woman, because Seth would go strangely quiet sometimes when he mentioned her. The way you go quiet about a subject, when there's too much to say and no good place to start. When Seth finally brought Abby home, Gloria was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling beside her. She looked Abby over the way you look at a price tag you already know you don't like. "You grew up in Sudbury," she said, not a question. "Yes," Abby said. "My mom still lives there." "Just your mom?" Abby held her voice steady. "Just my mom." Gloria nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. She did not offer Abby tea. She did not ask her anything about her work or how long she and Seth had been together. What she did was tell Seth there was a leak under the kitchen sink that needed looking at. Right then, while Abby sat alone at the table and listened to the sound of him opening the cabinet doors. Seth proposed 4 months later. He did it quietly, at a restaurant they both liked, with a ring that was simple and exactly right. Abby said yes before he finished the sentence. Gloria agreed to the marriage the way you agree to rain, not happily, but without any real way to stop it. The wedding was small, Gloria made sure of that. She arrived in a linen dress and pearl earrings and spent the reception talking mostly to her own friends. And when she did come and stand near Abby, she said things like, "Marriage takes a lot of work, especially when 2 people come from such different backgrounds," in a tone that was almost kind but wasn't quite. Mona drove down from Sudbury in her Civic, with a homemade cake in the back seat and a yellow dress she had bought specifically, because she knew it was Abby's favorite color. When the photographer gathered everyone together, Mona stood beside her daughter and held her hand. After the wedding, Abby moved into Seth's childhood home, because Gloria had offered the space and Seth thought it made sense while they saved for a place of their own. Abby said yes. She thought, it will be fine. She thought, I will work hard and eventually she will see who I am. She was wrong about how long that would take, and eventually she stopped being sure it was possible at all. Gloria had a gift for making Abby feel invisible in ways that were almost impossible to explain out loud. She would make dinner and set 3 plates and then say, "Oh, I didn't know if you were eating." She would accept a compliment from Seth about something Abby had done and say, "Yes, she does try." She would talk about Seth's future the way you talk about a project that is mostly finished, as if Abby were a temporary obstacle in the way of its completion. Abby told herself it was grief. Gloria had lost her husband young and raised 2 children alone. Abby could understand a woman like that being protective of her son. What she understood later was that Gloria was not protective, she was possessive, and possessive people do not loosen their grip just because you are patient. Diana came back from Vancouver in early November. Seth's sister, 3 years younger and twice as loud, with a smile that went to her eyes so convincingly that it took Abby almost 2 months to realize it never actually reached anything deeper than that. Diana moved back into her old bedroom and filled the house with a kind of energy that looked like warmth but functioned more like static. She complimented Abby's cooking and borrowed her earrings and told her she was so lucky to have a man like Seth. She and Gloria spent long evenings at the kitchen table after Seth had gone to bed, and when Abby walked through on her way to get water, they would pause their conversation. In a way that was so slight, she almost convinced herself she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. It was Diana who introduced Luca to the household. Luca was a doctor at the same hospital where Abby worked, a quiet and decent man who had grown up in Montreal and moved west for a residency, and never quite gotten around to moving back. He and Abby had been friendly for 2 years, the kind of workplace friendship that lives entirely inside the building, and never asks more than that. When Diana showed up at the hospital to drop off Abby's forgotten lunch one afternoon, she met Luca in the hallway outside the nurse's station, and decided apparently that he was exactly what she needed. She invited him to dinner at the house 3 weeks later, telling Abby it was just a group of people, nothing formal. There were 6 people at the table that night. By the time Abby understood what that dinner had actually been for, it was already too late to matter. By December, Abby knew she was pregnant. 8 weeks along, 2 heartbeats on the ultrasound screen. Twins. She sat in the car in the hospital parking lot for a long time after. Not because she was frightened, but because she wanted to hold the news just for herself for a few minutes, before it became something that belonged to other people too. She told Seth that night. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he pulled her into a hug so tight, she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. She told Mona the next morning. Mona cried, and then she laughed, and then she said she was going to need a bigger car. She should have told them all sooner. She should have known that in a house where nothing stayed private for long, waiting would not work in her favor. She found out much later, piece by piece, how the night in January actually came together. Luca confirmed parts of it. Seth eventually admitted the things he hadn't thought to question. Diana, when she was finally done running from her own consequences, offered one honest account, not out of remorse but out of the particular kind of relief that comes from having nothing left to protect. What happened was this. Seth had an overnight work trip to Barrie. Gloria told Abby she was going to her book club and would be back late. Luca came to the door saying he had found Abby's scarf at the hospital and wanted to return it. Abby let him in and offered him coffee, because that is what Abby did. Because she was a person who offered people coffee when they came in from the cold. She woke up on the couch at 11:15 that evening, with a pounding headache and no memory of the last 2 hours. Luca was sitting upright in the armchair across the room, with the same confused and frightened expression, neither of them able to account for the gap. Gloria came home at 11:30. Diana was with her. Seth arrived 40 minutes after that. What he saw was what he had been told he would see. Luca in his house, late at night, both of them disoriented and unable to explain themselves clearly. His mother standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. His sister with that expression on her face that looked like grief but was something else entirely. Abby tried to explain. She said something was wrong, that she didn't know how this had happened, that they had only had coffee. Seth's face went somewhere she had never seen it go before, somewhere closed and cold and already certain, and she understood that he had already decided. She said, "Seth, I'm pregnant. I'm carrying your children. Please just listen to me." Gloria said quietly, almost gently, "How do we know they're his?" It was said without cruelty in the tone. That was the part that stayed with Abby the longest. How soft Gloria's voice was when she said the worst thing she had ever said in Abby's presence. Matter of fact, the way you state something that has already been settled. Seth said, I need you to leave. He went upstairs. She heard the bedroom door close. Diana handed Abby her coat. Mona answered the phone on the second ring. It was -17 outside and Abby was sitting in her car in the driveway, engine running, and she said, Mom, I need to come home. She didn't explain anything else. Mona said, Come home then. She drove to Sudbury in the dark, 3.5 hours up the 400, and she did not cry until she pulled into her mother's driveway and saw the porch light on. She went back once to try to make Seth understand. She sat across from him in the living room and explained everything she knew, clearly and honestly. Luca had come to the door with her scarf. She had offered him coffee. She didn't remember anything after that. Seth listened all the way to the end and then he said, I need to trust what I saw. She left the house that time herself without being asked, and she drove back to Sudbury and she started making plans. She applied for a nursing position at Health Sciences North and was hired within 3 weeks. She found a 2-bedroom apartment close to Mona's house, bright windows and a decent kitchen and a backyard with a fence. She signed the lease with one hand on her stomach. Leo and Zoe were born in the first week of June, on a Tuesday morning when the sky outside was doing something extraordinary, a pink and orange thing that Mona kept photographing through the hospital window because she couldn't stop. She just couldn't stop. They were healthy and small, and their faces, when Abby first saw them, looked so much like Seth's face that she had to hold herself together for a moment before she let herself cry. She named them herself. Nobody argued with her. Nobody was there to argue. Luca called 3 days after the birth. He had heard through a colleague. He said he was sorry for his part in what had happened, even though as it wasn't his fault, and she believed him because she could hear in his voice that he meant it. He said he had tried to speak to Seth, had gone to the house and asked for a conversation, and Seth had refused. You didn't do anything wrong, Abby told him. Neither did you, he said. He drove up to Sudbury 2 months later to visit, just for a day. He brought presents that were practical and thoughtful, a proper diaper bag, a white noise machine, 2 soft elephants that Leo and Zoe would later refuse to sleep without. He sat on the floor of Abby's living room and held Zoe against his chest and talked to Mona about her garden for an hour. He's a good man, Mona said after he left. I know, Abby said. I'm just saying. Mom. Mona smiled and went to do the dishes. Abby did not spend much time thinking about what was happening in Hamilton. She was too busy for that, and the busy was a mercy. But things reached her anyway, through mutual acquaintances, and a colleague who had moved up from Hamilton and, once, a text message from Seth, when the twins were almost a year old, that said only, I've been thinking about what happened, and I don't know what the truth is anymore. She did not reply. By the time she decided how she would have replied, she had also decided it no longer mattered. What she heard was this. Diana had convinced Gloria to co-sign a loan for a business venture she described as a solid investment. Gloria had signed the paperwork, without reading it, the way you do when you trust someone, and the trust itself becomes a kind of blindness. The loan was for more than Gloria had in savings. Diana took the money and moved to Calgary, and did not answer her phone. Seth found out when debt collectors came to the door in early spring. She heard that Seth had been seeing someone Gloria had introduced him to, a woman named Cleo, who worked in real estate, and that it had ended after 7 months when Cleo decided she wasn't interested in being with a man who still had that particular expression on his face when certain subjects came up. She heard all of this and felt almost nothing, which told her that the part of herself that had been in love with Seth had finished grieving quietly, on its own schedule, while she wasn't paying close attention. The first time Gloria appeared in Sudbury, Abby was at the park near her apartment with the twins, watching Leo and Zoe run uncoordinated circles around the sandbox. She looked up and saw a woman standing at the edge of the path watching them. It took her a moment to recognize Gloria without the context of the Hamilton house around her. She looked smaller here, and older, and she was staring at the children with an expression Abby had never seen on her face before. Abby stood up. Gloria looked at her. They look like Seth, she said. Her voice was different. Yes, Abby said, they do. I didn't. You knew exactly what you were doing, Abby said, and you said what you said, in front of your whole family. Gloria opened her mouth and then closed it. Abby picked up her bag and called the twins over and walked home. The daycare incident happened 6 months after that. The teacher, Ms. Renard, called Abby at 10:45 in the morning. There was a woman at the door claiming to be Leo and Zoe's grandmother, saying she was there to pick them up early. Abby had never listed Gloria as an authorized person. She had listed Mona and Luca and one colleague from the hospital. "Please keep them inside," Abby said. "I'll be there in 8 minutes." It took her 7. Gloria was standing outside the entrance when Abby arrived. She had dressed carefully for it, a proper coat, good shoes, her hair done. She looked like someone who had prepared for a confrontation by trying to appear unassailable. Abby stepped between her and the door. "You told Seth those babies weren't his," Abby said. "You looked me in the face while I was telling you I was pregnant, and you asked how anyone could know they were his. You remember saying that." Gloria looked down briefly. "You don't get to show up here and call yourself their grandmother. You chose to give that up, and I'm not going to pretend you didn't make that choice. Abby, I want you to leave. And I want you to understand that if you come here again, if you go anywhere near that building, I will get a restraining order, and I will not feel a single thing about doing it." Gloria's face did something complicated. Abby watched it and did not move. "They're Seth's children," Gloria finally said, her voice cracking slightly at the edges. "I know they are," Abby said. "I've always known that. You're the one who decided not to." She went inside and signed the twins out and carried Zoe on her hip while Leo held her hand, and she did not look back. Luca had driven up that weekend, as he did most weekends now. He had taken a position at Health Sciences North 8 months ago. When he first mentioned the job offer, Abby had looked at him for a long moment before saying anything, and he had looked back at her with that careful and patient expression she had come to know well. The one that never asked for anything. "Is it for me?" she said. "It's a good job," he said, and yes, partly, mostly. She had stood in her kitchen, thinking about what it meant to let someone in again, after what letting someone in had cost her. She thought about Mona, who had been left alone and raised her daughter anyway, and never once framed it as a tragedy. She thought about Seth and the look on his face in his mother's living room, and how certain he had been. She thought about Luca sitting on the floor with Zoe on his chest. "I need you to be patient with me," she said. "I know," he said. He moved to Sudbury in February. By the time the daycare incident happened, he had a key to her apartment. That evening, after the twins were in bed, Abby sat across from him at the kitchen table and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, the way he always listened. "How are you feeling?" he asked when she finished. She thought about it honestly. "Like it's over," she said. "Like she finally showed me the last piece of it, and now I know exactly where the edges are." He nodded. "She'll probably try again," he said. "I know," Abby said, "and when she does, she'll get the same answer." Mona called that night at 9. She said a few things about Gloria that were not particularly charitable, and that Abby mostly agreed with. Then she asked, "You're all right?" "I'm all right," Abby said. She meant it in the way that is different from the way you say it to make someone stop worrying. She meant it the way you mean it when the words have finally caught up to the truth. She was working a job she was good at. Her children were healthy and loud, and left finger paintings on every available surface. Mona was 20 minutes away and came for dinner most Sundays. Luca was sitting on the other end of the couch with his book and his feet on the coffee table, completely at home. Seth knew the truth by now. Gloria had finally admitted what she and Diana had done, when he pressed her hard enough, when Diana was gone and the money was gone, and there was nothing left to do but say it plainly. He had called Abby once after that, his voice careful and stripped of everything it used to hold when he talked to her. He said he was sorry. He said he understood if she never wanted to hear from him again. She told him she appreciated the call. She told him she hoped he found his way to something better. She meant that too. But she also put her phone down and looked across the room at Luca and felt something that was not complicated at all. Something simple and steady. The kind of thing you only recognize once you have gone long enough without it to understand what you had been missing. Gloria had come to Sudbury, thinking she could collect what she had decided was hers. She had stood outside the daycare with her hand reaching for Abby's son and believed, in the way that people like Gloria always believe, that wanting something was the same as deserving it. She had been wrong about Abby from the very beginning, and now at last, there was nothing left for her to claim.